feeling the full force of the midday sun glaring down at her. Illarna strained as she pulled back her sword. Secure in the grip, she released all the energy stored in her muscles and pulled it around with all her strength. The sword sung as it cut cleanly through the air, its keen edge delving deep into the thicket. Leaning back for a much-needed breather, Illarna found herself looking down at the sweat streaming down her arms. Letting out a breath of exhaustion, she turned to the sun now set high in the sky. Yet the very effort proved arduous. Casting the sweat from her brow, she looked down to her one constant companion from these past 12 years, its heart shining bright in the harsh light. Pulling a cloth from her side, she began rubbing away the sticky residue left from her work, when suddenly a flare of orange flashed across its surface. Spurred to action, she searched for any signs of flame in the encroaching smoke. Suddenly a single tall blade of fire flared, reaching out over the horizon. Startled, Illarna allowed herself only a single moment, knowing personally the danger she would be in if the wind were to suddenly change. Immediately after the nascent thought formed, a stray gust rushed past her cheek, and Illarna could feel her heart skip a beat as the sounds of cracking in the distance filled her mind. Suddenly a fireball leaped out ahead of the main fire. Watching intently, Illarna could do nothing as the fireball burst into flames in a large section of grasslands not too far to the west. Hearing footsteps, Illarna waited impatiently as one of the maidens approached with meaningful haste. "My lady, the fire break is nearing completion, but there is more yet left unfinished. There is still at least 100 meters on the north side that needs to be cut before the fire arrives." Showing signs of physical strain, Illarna wiped the blade of her sword one last time and slid it back into its sheath. "How long do you expect it to take, Illarna?" "Another 20 minutes at least, my lady." Reassured, Illarna nodded and quickly gave orders for the southern half of her force to assist Illarna in completing her mission. Looking around at her own section now all but complete, Illarna corralled the remaining maidens and ordered them back into the city. Returning to her station with swelled numbers at her back, Illarna immediately acted upon the orders given. One by one, the maidens moved off into the fields and began clearing the growth. Filled with pride by the sight, Illarna could not imagine herself ever serving in any other unit nor craft or occupation, and the feeling escaped her lips, if only upon a whisper. "Maidens, I cannot express how honored I am. I doubt there is anything that could break your spirit." Arriving back at the western entrance of the village, Illarna's demeanor instantly changed as she could see the amount of work that still needed to be done. But more than this, she feared the fact that everyone else could see the same. Looking around, she knew that most of the peasants were moving far too slowly for the task mounted against them. However, she could not feel any anger towards them, for she felt the same aches and pains while being far younger than most. Wavering, she could do little more than stand there as she felt the last of her stamina beginning to flee her bones. "Unacceptable," she murmured as she forced her will into adamantium wall against the doubt, for she knew that only a great work would see them all through this day. Hiding all signs of her own fatigue, Illarna moved along the line and instructed all who stood immobile to fall back to the second line of defence and prepare, for if they failed on the first, the fire would have but one way to spread. Her body going through the motions of carting piles of wood and rubble from one side of the road to the other, Illarna could not help but let her mind wander through the intrusive thoughts that lingered, even now. First, she thought of her mission and its mandate to stop the prophecy of the Tal'Doran from coming to pass. A quest that Illarna had always held close to heart, considering it her birthright, for she had been told it was so since the first days of the training as a maiden. However, the thought that vexed her was not that of her father's mandate, but rather the recurring dreams that had been plaguing her mind every night this past week. No matter how hard she tried to think on the matter, she would always find the same answer, that there wasn't one, let alone any understanding, as to why she had the dreams in the first place. Maybe Duval is right, Illarna thought to herself. Perhaps the dream was meant to be a warning about this fire. But why? Was all this predetermined? Was me riding to the aid of this village always going to happen? Who is that man? And why does his eyes haunt me so? Or maybe it means something completely different. I don't know, by the light, what am I supposed to do? Trying to wrap her head around all the potential meanings of the dream, Illarna missed the subtle change in the direction of the wind, but the smell of ash quickly pulled her back to reality. Realizing she had missed this crucial change, Illarna looked to the direction of the fire, which was now due west. Instantly she realised that the fire had already changed direction and what that would mean for the people of Rennum. Taking one last moment to look over the maidens and villagers moving about their work, Illarna quietly considered how much was yet unfinished. But it was just as she feared. There was far more work than hands available to complete it, and for a lone solitary moment she questioned whether it was wise to get everyone to fall back to the second line, or was it wiser still to do nothing and keep them where they were. Yet always the cruel mistress time would prove itself, as before Illarna could even make her decision, let alone put it to action, an endless churning wave of smoke rolled over the outskirts of the village, making it impossible to see more than 3 meters ahead. Training kicking in. Illarna yelled at the top of her voice. "Maidens, sound the retreat and fall back. Let no one be left behind." Hearing the deafening screams of countless voices calling for help, Illarna knew she needed to do something to calm them. "Everyone keep your cool and stay together. Hold out your hands and grab a hold of those closest to you. Stay close and follow the sound of my voice." With the sound of coughing coming from every direction, Illarna moved east to the second line. Hearing drums sounding from the north, Illarna smiled a little, knowing that Aaliyah and Nadira had finished cutting the firebreak and were now on their way to reinforce the second line. "By the Tal, thank you, Alard and Aestir, you may have just saved us."
My lady.
Aaliyah and Nadira spoke in unison as they fell in beside Illarna. "It seems you finished just in time for fate to test our resolve, ladies. It seems the fire will reach us within the next few minutes. It would appear that the fire was either much closer than I anticipated, or the wind has a mind of its own and it really has it out for us. Either way, once we reach the second line, make sure everyone dampens their faces to stop them from getting heat stroke. Also, make sure they wash away any soot that builds up on the face. You don't want to be getting any more of that in our bodies than we must." Reaching the second line, Illarna could see that many were already suffering from the side effects of smoke inhalation. Some complained about their eyes burning, while others struggled with shortness of breath. But besides these very physical constraints already presenting in the ill, Illarna could see clearly that almost everyone present had already begun to show the very real signs of shock. "Aaliyah, one more thing. I will also need some maidens to take the injured to the triage as soon as you are able." "Yes, my lady," Aaliyah said, instantly falling to her duty. Final preparations made, Illarna forced a defiant look upon her face, knowing all eyes were now looking upon her, and to the slightest signs of fear could spell doom upon the entire operation. Yet she would be lying if her heart did not threaten to break, as she looked upon the smoke swirled above. Like the calm before the storm, the line of defence suddenly fell still as the anticipation for the upcoming fight grew all-imposing, holding every last soul within its inescapable grasp. Soon the murmurs and coughs of anxious peasants were the only sounds that could be heard from the line, yet Illarna could hardly fault them, for she too felt the bitter sting of her own nerves failing her. No, there is nothing to be done now but to wait. Feeling a slight flutter in the air, Aneka looked up just in time to catch the winds softly change to a slightly southwestward direction. With a slight smile and a little spark of hope seeding within, she allowed a faint hope to flourish that with this little breath of luck, the fire may yet bypass the village. "Is this a good sign, Miss Fullerton? The winds are starting to move the smoke away from the village," asked one of the villagers. "I must be honest with you, it is a good sign, but it does not necessarily mean we are safe. Fires are very unpredictable and very dependent on the weather conditions, and I fear it impossible to predict whether it's currently in our favour or against us. We are completely at the wind's mercy, and at this point anything could happen, so all there is for us to do is wait and remain vigilant, ever ready to fight the fire wherever it might sprout." Annika answered, watching as a young man slumped back amongst the others. Quickly, the eerie silence fell back over the village, and even Illarna refused to move from where she stood for fear that the slightest movement would let others in on the chaotic nature of her mind. She knew well that right now it was her sole duty to remain imposingly still and deafeningly silent, a metaphoric bulwark for others to pin their hopes ever searching as she was for any sign that the wind might change again. Time seemed to slow as the fire travelled along the western side of the village, its edge constantly burning against the firebreak the maidens had hastily set. As if by the words of prophecy, the wind suddenly turned on itself, sending great twisting spires of flame high up into the air, forming great towers of fire. One after the other, the fire spires fell and rose again, concentrating their chaotic energies anew. But eventually something must break, and so once again the wind changed, casting the blaze east, right into the village. The brief respite of clean air quickly faded, as hot smoke promptly took its place, rushing back over the village, blanketing it in a thick cover of ash and darkness. Fears now realised, Annika stood incapable of moving to action. Catching a glint of light in the darkness, she turned, and to her surprise, she caught the glint of Illarna's armour as she forced her way through the smoke. Quickly the realisation hit her. Illarna was making her way straight to the head of the defence line.
Oh, by the towel.
Annika sighed in disbelief, looking back to finally see the incoming inferno.
Why couldn't you have just bypassed this damned village? Must you always move to defy the gods?
Embarrassed by her lack of action, Annika decided she would not waste another second on that thought, and immediately turned her attention back to her charge.
Right, we're up, everyone. Ready yourselves. Grab a damp cloth and hold it up to your face. Then start filling buckets and line them up along the well so we can pass them down the line. The person at the end of the line will use the bucket to douse the fire wherever it sprouts, and then return with the bucket to the well so it can be filled once again to start the process over. Understood?
Leaving no room for hesitancy, she moved to action, picking up the first bucket. It did not take long for a wall of jarring heat to grow along the street, as the villagers fought to defend their homes, and a second wave of smoke had already begun to drop over the village, forcing visibility to little more than several meters in any direction. The familiar sounds of coughing and spluttering grew steadily, so Annika reaffirmed her point.
Remember to keep the damp cloth over your faces.
Noticing the first fire trying to jump the street, Annika moved forward, throwing a bucket of water on top of it, quenching the flames. But not a moment later, a second spot fire ignited up the road, then another, and before long the entire line was moving buckets forward from person to person in methodical fashion. Annika quickly realised that the front line would soon become a hard, gruelling fight, and at any moment it could get away from them. Yet, as quickly as the thought passed, she began to fear that there was far too few buckets, and even fewer people to use them effectively in dealing with such a persistent fire. Instantly, she resigned herself to the fact that it was only going to get worse, for she would need to be careful and preserve as much strength for the last line as she could, for at the current rate of advancement she feared that the majority of her numbers would potentially fall unconscious before the fire even reaches the centre of the village. Now moving by pure instinct, she wondered,
if the fire was travelling from the north, then made its way east, wouldn't that make the grasslands towards the north already burnt? Well, mostly at least.
Annika mused over that fact for a moment, realising she might just be able to aid the defence more effectively on the ends of the fire. Turning to the nearest maiden, she gave orders for her to take charge and to get word to Illarna that she and 2 other maidens would be heading north in hopes to fight the fire more effectively. With a nod in acknowledgement from the maiden, Annika moved to a sprint. Running through smoke and ash, Annika could feel the fire blazing along the northern line. Yet as she broke from the fire front, she saw the full might of the fire bearing against them and despaired. Yet her training would demand nothing but her full enduring duty to the very end. Making her way further north as quickly as she could, Annika soon realised that the smell of fire had begun to fade.
This just might work. It seems that the north side of town might just be the key to beat this fire. I'll have to notify the maidens of this when I get to them. Hopefully we might be able to stop the fire from spreading around our flanks.
As the fire raged closer and closer to being out of control, Illarna stopped needing to catch her breath, yet she would not waste a single second longer than she needed, so she tried to take in her surroundings. Though hazy at first, a sudden strong wind gave her a momentary glimpse of most of the line, but all she could see was how fatigued and worried the peasants have become. Some had even begun falling to the ground, only to be lifted back up by their comrades. A feeling of pride mixed with the bitter flavour of grief washed over her, knowing all too well that a few might not last another hour. Reminded of her own duty by an extreme heat burning away her tears, Illarna found herself again uncertain and questioning, for she feared that she may have bitten off more than she could chew. Shaking her head, she struck the thought from her mind and got back to work, for she knew that the defence would most certainly fail if even a single soul held back. Hearing rushed footsteps, Illarna pulled herself back to what looked to be a maiden from Annika's charge.
Annika has a plan to stop the fire from spreading north. It should decrease the area that needs to be protected, but more importantly, the plan should prevent the fire from flanking the defence line.
I do hope she knows what she is doing, Illarna expressed with the clear exhaustion and worry carrying in her voice. With smoke billowing ever thicker and fires beginning to ignite all over the place, the fight to keep the fire at bay faltered upon a knife's edge. Even with over 200 people aiding the effort to fight, The line flickered and threatened to fail. However, by the will of every person present, they held the fire at bay, time and time again. Her own strength about to fail, Illarna pushed on, fueled by pure adrenaline. But the line had been fighting for a good hour, and so she made the only decision she could. Maidens, it's time to fall back. Take all you can with you. Showing their unsurpassed training, the maidens followed their orders with a grace few knightly orders could match, and everyone began to withdraw. With the smoke clearing slightly, Illarna realized the winds were picking up again, but as she investigated, she quickly realized there had been no change in its direction. Suddenly the sound of drums sounded. Illarna smiled as she knew Annika had reached the northern front and had successfully held the fire back. Hearing a loud crack, Illarna barely had time to react before a spray of embers flew past, narrowly missing her. Quickly finding her feet, Illarna turned, focusing on the spot where the embers had landed. Counting no less than 5 separate fires beginning to burn, Illarna pulled up a bucket and doused the nearest, but as she turned to get another, she saw the bigger picture. The second line was already lost. Large sections on the eastern side of the road were already beginning to burn, some of which were already out of control. The true reality of the situation hit her like a sledgehammer. Seeing no other way, Illarna turned to the maiden behind her, ordering her to signal the retreat. Waiting for the maiden to fall to action, Illarna turned north and moved into a sprint, making sure no one would be left behind. Struggling to see more than 2 feet in front of herself, Illarna held tight to those trailing behind her, for a single slip could be the difference between life and death for the lot of them. Every step taken guided only by the wind at her back, and a hand outstretched as a warning probe for danger. Stopping for a moment as the hair on her body began to stand on end, Illarna looked around as she sensed something or someone watching her. Suddenly a shadow in the fire began forming into a silhouette. The impossibly white heat in the fire highlighted its figure. Heart racing, she gripped harder to the hand behind her and moved as fast as she could, bursting from the smoke onto the main street of Rennum, her entire group falling to the ground, fatigued to the point of fainting. Looking back, Illarna counted their number, making sure none had been left behind. But as she came to the last, she realized that 2 of the villagers were missing. Hearing the familiar sound of footsteps approaching, Illarna stumbled to her feet and recognized Sylvain and a small clutch of maidens alongside her. A smile growing on her face as she stood firm and soldierly. Sylvain, I need you to escort the injured and elderly out of the village via the north road. I don't think the fire here is going anywhere anytime soon. Illarna ordered sternly but clearly fatigued.
I got this, La. You have been fighting this fire all day. Let me stay, and you go. Clearly you need to rest. Seriously, look at you. You can barely stand. You're breathing heavy and forcing out your words. And by the light, look at all that soot and grime. You're in no condition to continue fighting. Seriously, I'm surprised you haven't collapsed already.
Trust me when I say that I could sleep for a week, but I will be staying right here to oversee the defences. Take a group of maidens with you. You will need them to attend the injured and the sick, for I fear there will be many more before the day is seen to an end. Illarna paused a moment, looking hesitantly towards Sylvain. Be careful. There is something unnatural about this fire. I don't know what it is that I saw, but I cannot shake the feeling that there is something very wrong here. Sylvain hesitated a moment before agreeing.
Yes, my lady.
No sooner did they leave, the fire burst into action onto the street, spreading fire far and wide. Wasting no time, everybody moved to effect throwing water over the flames and smothering what they could. However, as soon as one fire was smothered, another 5 sprung up around it, quickly growing out of control and intensifying. The fire expanded rapidly before suddenly exploding with an unbelievable force, knocking everything and everyone over for hundreds of meters. Giant fireballs rained down over the city in every direction, inadvertently cutting Illarna and a few of her maidens off from everyone else. Feeling the rocky ground pressing against her back, Illarna opened her eyes to a sky darkened by black smoke. Rolling to her side, she looked in horror at the destruction scattered before her. The unconscious forms of her maidens sprawled across the sand and stone shook her to action, but as soon as she moved, every muscle in her body lit up with pain. Gritting her teeth, she stood staggered, barely enduring the pain, yet she did endure, and before long she had stumbled to the closest maiden. Scouring through her pocket, Illarna looked for anything she could use to damp her face, but she found nothing. Looking around for a way to escape, Illarna quickly realized that she was surrounded by fire, and could see that there was little chance that any of them were going to get out. Suddenly, the edges of the fire began to build up and churn, and a second explosion abruptly erupted, sending a pillar of fire into the sky. Falling back, the flames coalesced into a figure of molten flame. Unable to turn from the sight, Illarna looked to what she thought was its head, the flames flaring bright from the demon's eyes betraying its intent. Seconds later, the fire demon sprung forward, searing all traces of sweat away in an instant, lifting her arm up in an instinctive gesture to protect herself. Illarna watched in bewilderment as the entity smashed against a barrier of fire forming before her, the collision sending a hail of embers in all directions. The sustained force from the fire demon wailing against the barrier taxed its integrity to the point that Illarna could feel the fire beginning to sear her cheeks. Yet she had no idea what was happening, nor what was protecting her, but she did not dare move her arm, even though she could feel the energy draining each time the entity clashed with the barrier. Bashing and thrashing in a rage against her defiance, the fire demon roared. Feeling the last of her strength fleeing her body, Illarna's vision grew hazy, and suddenly she wondered if her end was fast approaching. Wishing only to see the sky one last time, Illarna looked to the heavens and noticed a strange clearing in the smoky sky. With what remained of her depleted self, she smiled and watched as a white eagle flew across the sky to the west. In that small moment of peace, all her other worries faded away, and she could not help but think how beautiful the creature looked as it soared. Suddenly she wondered whether she may be hallucinating, but then she thought that if this was the last thing she saw before her death, then she did not mind it at all, and at least she figured it was a little less morbid than fearing one's end. Faint and sounding a great distance away, Illarna heard the voice of a maiden trying to get her attention.
"The wind, my lady, it's finally changed. It's forcing the fire back onto itself."
Trying to turn back to the demon, Illarna suddenly realized she was on the ground. Tilting her head, she looked to the creature of fire as it fell back into the flames, making a high-pitched wail as it dispersed. Its piercing shriek forced everyone to fall to a prone position, their hands raised to their ears in an effort to protect themselves from the harrowing sound. All except for Illarna, for her mind had already gone, and all she could hear were the sound of bells, as the last of her senses faded into the world of dreams.